very much for joining us on this very, very special edition of the India Development Debate. I'm Supriya Shrinate. Today is Teachers' Day. And before I go any forward, I wish everybody who's taught me and my colleagues in life a very happy Teachers' Day. It's time to then put the spotlight on education. We're taking a break away from polity, policy and economics to talk about development issues that really matter and what matters more than education. Almost 85% of Indian youth are not employable. That's the take from the high priests of India's tech industry some 4 months ago actually. They sound a bit exaggerated, but the reality is that Indian education system is dated and needs an urgent overhaul. Consider this. A study conducted by EY for industry lobby group FICCI says a big majority of our managers and engineers are not equipped to deal with challenges at today's work. Cut to primary education, the situation is completely different. Data suggests the country has made some really big strides on enrollments in schools thanks to the Modi government's Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. Actually, that dates back to the Modi government. Be it gender parity or the dropout rate, there is a marked improvement with the numbers inching closer to a perfect 100%. But why is there such a yawning gap when it comes to primary and higher education? As the nation celebrates Teachers' Day, ET now puts the spotlight on India's education system. And I couldn't have wished or asked for a better panel this evening than the one I have. It's my pleasure to introduce this panel. Anil Swarup, former Education Secretary in the Government of India, and somebody who once told me that he's happiest when he's amongst students when he was serving in the Government of India. Of course, Atishi Marlena, former Education Advisor to the Delhi government, joins us as well. So does Colonel Gopal Karunakaran, CEO of Shivnadar School. Dr. Urvashi Sahani, founding President and Chief Executive of Study Hall Educational Foundation and non-resident fellow at Brookings Institution. We've also got Meeta Sengupta, Education Strategist. Thanks very much, each one of you, for being with us. And Mr. Swarup, I think it's only fair that I begin with you because I still remember that picture in your office, you amongst a bunch of school students, and you said you were the happiest when you are in places like that. Let's put the spotlight on 2030. India will be one of the youngest nations in the world with an estimated 140 million individuals in their 20s. Just for the benefit of our viewers, that will mean 1 in every 4 graduate in the world is going to be a product of India's higher education system or India's education system at large. Are we ready for that challenge?
Let us first understand what has happened and what has not happened. What you rightly mentioned, I think we've got the child to the school. But what has not happened is the quality of education. In fact, ironically, the learning outcomes reveal that the quality has actually gone down over the years. So we have to look at why has that happened. I think as Education Secretary, I tried to grapple with this issue. And I discovered that we in Delhi are trying to evolve policies for everyone sitting in Delhi. I think India is an extremely diverse country. Let me give you an example. If a teacher doesn't go to the school in Kerala, I think he will be lynched. In states like UP and Bihar, they take it as a right not to go to the school. So I think the prescription that we try and find out in Delhi may not work in every state. What we have to do is to allow states to evolve themselves, facilitate and help them to do that. We started with that. I think there are some remarkable results that are emerging. What has happened in Rajasthan, what is happening in Maharashtra, what is happening in Chhattisgarh is quite remarkable. There's so much to learn from them, that the quality of education has improved. The last assessment survey that we did, I think Rajasthan, which was right at the bottom, came right at the top, as was the case in Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh. They also did very well. So we have to learn from within the country. We are in this habit of importing things from Finland, England, Scotland, Holland, of all the lands of the world, not looking at the solutions that we have here within this country. I think that is what is required, and that needs to be done.
Right. You know, that's a very remarkable insight, that it's not just a, education is not just one stroke education that we can talk about in India. Different states have different attitudes. I mean, Tamil Nadu spends a lot more, Kerala spends a lot more. And you're right. I come from UP and I know of teachers who've never gone to their schools in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So that's an important point that you raised there. But Dr. Urvashi Sahani, if I may come to you on this, I'm going to talk about spends on education in a while from now. But do you agree with Mr. Swarup here that the role that the state plays, and I'm talking about individual states, is very, very important? And if there is a lack of education, if there's a lack of quality, the states need to shoulder the blame as well. We have seen Delhi government reserve seats for EWS. We have seen Mamata Banerjee starting Kanyashri schemes, which not only has stopped child marriage but increased girl education. The question is that what are other states doing to catch up? This is not a one strategy fits all kind of a thing.
You know, I couldn't agree more with Mr. Anil Saru that states need to evolve their own solutions. And of course, individual schools must shoulder the responsibility too, and there are some remarkable innovations that come from individual schools. At the same time, when you look at a larger picture, I think unless the government shoulders the responsibility, unless it takes the lead, unless it provides the serious governance, and most importantly shows that it cares, individual schools and the effort they make is going to have very limited impact. At the same time, let me point out that individual schools have tried very hard, and what they have probably shown is that we need to include in our curriculum a focus not just on literacy and academic learning, but on teaching our children how to become good democratic citizens, developing a social and political consciousness on issues like caste, gender, poverty. The reason democracy has not succeeded as much as it should have in our country and many others is that we are still linking education to the workforce, whereas we should be thinking of educating our children to become good democratic citizens, which means they should become good questioners, they should become good critical thinkers, and most importantly, think critically about social and political issues. And I think several individual schools have tried to develop and evolve curricula that shows the way. At the same time, when we look at the country as a whole, we do need to first of all demonstrate that there is a very strong political will. And then we need an executive skill to match it up, which is what has happened in Rajasthan, as Mr. Anil Sarup mentioned, and you've seen an almost 360-degree change there. The point is, if the government really wills it, if it shows that it cares and shows the leadership, I don't see why things won't change. I don't see why teachers who, as you mentioned, Mr. Sarup, think it's their right not to go to schools can be motivated and also held accountable and made to go to their schools and made to teach. But there again, it's important that what do we teach in our schools is very important.
Absolutely. I will come to quality of education in just a while from now, but I want to take it across to Colonel Gopal Karunakaran. And Colonel Gopal Karunakaran, it's important that we talk about numbers up front. If education is really the building block of our society, which everybody agrees on this show and otherwise that it is, we prepare citizens for tomorrow, we instill the confidence, we instill learning in them. If that is the building block, what explains the expenditure on education? I mean, I'm just going to talk about gross numbers. The expenditure on primary education as percentage of the GDP between fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 15, the figures that I have available right here with me, have varied from 1.6 to under 2% of the GDP. Do these numbers need to go higher? Do these numbers need to increase for us to make a meaningful contribution?
Firstly, of course, I agree greatly with the panelists and what they've spoken. And when we talk about what we can do to improve Indian education, I think there's a plethora of things we can do. But coming specifically to the numbers, and that's a very pertinent point that you raised, I think it's important to understand that if you really look at the last 20 years, from about 20% enrollments in private schools, in a span of 20 years, we've gone and increased that to something like 40 to 50% enrollment in private schools. Now, look at that in the context of what is happening across any large or medium-sized country across the world. Private schools constitute about 5 to 7% of school-going children. And I think the real crisis is the lack of faith in the government school education system across India. And we are talking of extremely large numbers. We have 250 million plus children who go to school. And if more than half of them are going to go to private institutions, and the money that you're talking about, the allotment as a percent of GDP, which is going into the government's kitty, and we're talking about increasing that, I think we have to seriously consider if the faith of the people is not there in sending their children to government institution, are we putting good money into the wrong place? And that's a very serious issue, and we don't talk about this percentages enough. I think gross enrollments in government schools falling rapidly across the states, except for the odd states like Kerala or Delhi, is a matter of huge concern. I think that is a key concern, and we've got to really see where we need to put the money, because governments across both the states and the center have to shape up. And the easiest way is, if they do a great job, I think the layman knows where to send his child in, and they are not going to government schools right now.
Okay, I will come to private education and what role can private schools and private companies, Indian corporates play amidst all of this. But very quickly, Meeta Sengupta, the question to ask you is that, we may debate the state of Indian education, and we may point fingers, but the reality is that Indian education has held us in good stead so far. So, I mean, all is not lost. We've done extremely well as far as the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan is concerned. There's stellar success there. About 96-98% of children, we've got them to school, like Mr. Anil Swarup said, in the age group of 6 to 14. Can we brush away what we've achieved? Yes, there are many reasons for this, whether it's the midday scheme and other things like that. But, as we find solutions to the problems that exist, can we afford to turn a blind eye to the achievements that have been made?
Why would we turn a blind eye to the achievements? And I would counter with that. I think the achievements that we have in the education sector should inspire us to do better. These are the things that we got right, and these are the things that we need to seek to replicate in the contexts that are appropriate for them. I think Shri Anil Swarup was absolutely right to say that India is not a homogeneous unit when it comes to education. So we should not be seeking homogeneous solutions. That indeed is true. When we look at the successes that we have, not one of those successes actually has been scalable 100% in a precisely standardized manner. But then here is the key question. Are we seeking to standardize, or are we seeking to raise standards in education? And of course we are seeking to raise standards. I know you're going to talk about quality later on. So when we seek to raise standards, what do we have as evidence? Because we're not going to experiment with our children. We need evidence to say this has actually worked in a particular situation, this works in this precise context, and in this context, let us therefore try to build on the successes that we have. Of course, we have fantastic successes. If you just scan the newspapers for Indian origin people getting awards across the world, you know that we have started with something fantastic. We need to build on it.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'll have to just come in there. Meeta Sengupta, hold the thought. I'm sorry, I'll have to just come in there. I'll go across to Atishi Marlena, who's joining us on the phone line on this debate. She's stuck in traffic. She's on her way to our cameras. But Atishi, we began talking about the spend on education. We talked about are we ready. I think the question that follows next is that we've made some good strides as far as enrollment in the private sector education is concerned. And Mr. Swarup was kind enough to find out the statistics for us there. But despite these improvements, keeping children in school through graduation or through higher education or even through middle education is a huge issue. Nationally, 29% of children drop out before completing 5 years of education. I mean, what will make our children stick around in schools is really the big question, and that's the challenge, is it not? Atishi.
I think that the reason this is a challenge is because when children are coming into schools, even though they are staying in schools, often for 5 years, for 8 years or even longer, the children are actually not learning anything. Year after year, you have the Pratham Asar report that gets released in January, which tells us that 50% of children in grade 5 cannot even read a grade 2 level text. So why would a child keep coming to school if they are not learning anything? And I think this is where the Right to Education Act and education policy has fallen short, because there has been a lot of focus on inputs, what kind of classrooms we should have, how many teachers should we have, what kind of infrastructure the school should have. And there has not been enough focus on the output in terms of what are children actually learning. So if children are to stay in school, I think the center stage needs to shift not from the inputs we are giving, what teaching we are doing, but to the learning of the child. And I think in that respect, a great stride has been made by having NAS across the entire country. And if we can keep having these learning assessments on a regular basis, then the focus front, up and center would be on the learning outcomes of the child.
That's an important point, and I think because the discussion is shifting to quality of education, let's put the focus there. Mr. Swaroop, quality of learning is a major issue, and like Atishi was pointing out there, annual status of education 2017 says 25% of people, of kids between 14 to 18 years could not read basic text fluently in their own language. And a huge majority of them could not do simple arithmetic calculations. The question is that, you know, how does one deal with this quality of education? Because each one of you has spoken on that being the big devil in the room. How do you deal with that?
First of all, I totally agree with the last panelist. I think she's hit the nail on the head. And that is precisely what has been attempted in last 1 year. If you recall, the Right to Education Act mandated that we should determine the learning outcomes and make an assessment on the basis of that. For almost 8 to 9 years, there was nothing that was done in it. So we did determine the learning outcomes. The parameters were clearly worked out. The National Achievement Survey came about. Through this survey, we have actually got to know district-wise as to what is going wrong in that particular district. This is the largest ever survey. If I remember correctly, more than 2 million children were assessed. On the basis of that, what is now being done is to prepare a district-wise plan for each school, determining as to why the quality of education did not improve. Was it the absence of teachers? Was it the quality of teachers? What is the pedagogy? Was it the curriculum? There are many answers that are emerging as a consequence of that. Unless you know the why of a problem, to attempt to find a solution will not be there. So what has happened is, we've now come to know the why of a problem or why it is happening. There's another very interesting development that is happening, and that was also alluded to by some of the panelists. We find solutions working in certain areas. So we have to look at, if Rajasthan did it, let us try and understand how did it do it. And Rajasthan, the terrain there, so to say, is similar to what obtains in Haryana, what obtains in Gujarat, what obtains in UP. So if Rajasthan could do it, these states could do it. Similarly, if Maharashtra could do it, the adjoining states could also do it. So the good news is, there are many things happening on scale. Now they have to be scaled further for us to learn from others. The problem that we had was, we had become so fascinated with Finland that we didn't have the detention policy. I'm not for detaining children, but unless you have this threat of detaining somebody, the children were going up to class 8 and 9 and almost learning nothing. So you have to make an assessment there. So first step has been taken, the assessment has been done. Identification has happened as to why learning was not happening, and I hope that the district level plans that are being prepared, they will lead to improved learning. I must compliment again the Delhi government. They did wonderful job. I think other urban areas should learn from what has happened in Delhi, as the other states should learn from what has happened in Rajasthan. So there are clear-cut models available for us to learn from, and we will be able to scale them because they have succeeded in these very objective conditions.
You know, you make a very important point about no detention, and I think because Atishi Marlena deserves some of the credit with what has happened in Delhi, it's time to congratulate her. But Atishi, I also have a follow-up question to ask of you. Mr. Swaroop made a very important point of no detention, and I think it's an extremely unpopular thing to say. But is that one of the reasons that is responsible for this appalling quality of education, where our children in class 8th and 9th can't comprehend what is being taught in 6th and 7th, class 6 can't comprehend what's being taught in class 2. Is this no detention policy actually something that deserves a review, you believe?
The no detention policy does deserve a review, but I don't think that is the cause of the problem. I think that there is, even if there was a detention policy, even if children were being held back, I think that what would eventually happen is that children who are not learning anything would, take an exam in class 5 once, they would take it twice, they would take it thrice, if they fail 3 times, and they would just drop out of school. The dropouts that we may be seeing, in fact, the number of dropouts might actually go up if the no detention policy is removed. I think the bigger question and the more central question that needs to be addressed is that if children are coming to school, if enrollment has gone up, if attendance is regular, and if a child is coming into school, why are they not learning anything? And I think this is the question that we really need to answer. And I think that we need to, especially in the context of government schools, understand that a large majority of children who are coming into government schools today are coming from homes where no one knows how to read and write. They are first generation learners. So if 50% of children in government schools are first generation learners, maybe it is time that we evolve our teaching methodology. Maybe it's time that we evolve our textbooks. Maybe it's time we evolve our teacher training techniques to deal with this changed social reality. And I think that is the question that we need to address. Whether we detain the child or we do not detain the child is almost irrelevant. The question is the child learning anything when they are in the school?
Actually, that's a very important point that you bring about. You know, everybody says Indian education has produced some of the tallest captains of global industry, whether it's a Satya Nadella or whether it's a Sundar Pichai. We've created that. The reality is that they were not first generation learners. And now that you will have these first generation learners, perhaps the debate needs to shift to what kind of education needs to evolve with that. And Ms. Sani, if I may come to you, Ms. Urvashi Sani, what sort of evolution needs to happen in our curriculum, in the way we are teaching children, which will help them navigate in a world that's open ahead of them, but will also keep in mind the reality that these are not people who can go back at home and learn from their parents. They can't discuss issues with their parents because they are first generation learners themselves.
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think as we're moving, everybody's talking about the 20th century, everybody's talking about the uncertainties that lie in the future, and also lamenting that the education system isn't keeping up with the times. I think very importantly, we need to make a huge shift from a fact-based education system to one that is process-based, that is based on critical thinking, on questioning, where asking questions becomes more important than answering them, where processing information and discussing it becomes more important than memorizing it. That is a huge shift we need to make. And in my opinion, another critical move, if we hope to succeed and become a thriving democracy, is that we need to develop critical social and political thinking skills in our students. Gender, for example. India has been designated as one of the most dangerous places for girls in the world. You see the rates of violence in our country. I think it's very important that we include a strong focus on gender studies as well in our schools, so that both girls and boys learn to think critically about patriarchy, think critically about social customs that keep the situation where it is, and learn to imagine ways of an alternate social order. So we need to change our curriculum drastically, whereas we are all lamenting the learning outcomes, the children aren't learning to read and write. I think that's not enough. That's still working at a very basic level. We need to think about what are they reading, what are they writing, what are they thinking, are they thinking at all? And we have to stop linking education only to the workforce, but link it to becoming more critical thinking citizens.
Okay, Colonel Gopal Karurakaran, is the debate also not just about critical thinking? Yes, we need to tell our students, we need to tell our children to ask more questions. We need to instill a sense of inquiry, curiosity, innovation and all of that. But we also at some stage, the kind of economy that we are, the kind of first generation thinkers we are, is there a greater need to marry vocations with education at a much earlier stage than perhaps is being thought about right now?
There's little doubt about that. We've fallen into this trap since independence that it will be only formal education like the British left us that we will continue to do. And we've sort of missed the boat when it comes to vocational skilling of a large swath of Indians. Germany, Singapore are all huge examples of how children move during school years into vocational education towards the later years and move into vocational skills, and therefore there is a whole passage of work which you can determine after you finish school and go into vocational institutes at colleges and post colleges, etc. So that's certainly something we have missed. But I'd like to just add to what interestingly, this is a panel, since you're not discussing politics, all the panelists seems to be completely agreeing with each other, and that's pretty heartening. But there is a very important issue which we must address, and that is teachers' education. There are no quick fix solutions. You cannot solve these issues in 1 year or 2 years, but there is a whole need to revamp teachers' education. Our teachers' education colleges are completely obsolete, and when you're looking at a 1 million schools, 250 million students, we have to ask that question on Teachers' Day. Phenomenal teachers in terms of attitude, commitment, but are they skilled the way they should be? I think there's a huge area there, and without the right skills, without the right teachers, we will not have the sort of outcomes that we want, and that's something which is extremely important to address.
Okay, just give me a minute, because I think that's an important story and an important issue that I want to go back to both Atishi and Anil Swarup to address that issue. And Anil Swarup, you know, Colonel Gopal Karunakaran raises an important point about teachers training. I'll come to that in just a bit. But look at the kind of agony of a government teacher. The salary for a newly recruited teacher is about 19,300 in primary schools, 20,300 in upper primary schools per month. The salary for school heads is about 40,000 rupees per month. Some states pay more and some may pay less, but that's the average figure that we are talking about. A reputed private school pays more than what is prescribed in the pay commission, and perhaps rightly so. Is this the reason that a profession like teaching, which is actually preparing, you know, our citizens of the future, gets just no, you know, forget about the dignity, but it's not even remunerative to be a teacher today?
For a change, I totally disagree with you. I think your facts are incorrect. If you look at the average salary being paid in the private schools is much, much less than the salary paid in the government schools. In fact, in the villages, the school teacher is probably the richest person in the village. That's the salary that he gets. And that's why everyone wants to become a government teacher. He teaches or not teaches, that's a different matter at all. So your facts are incorrect. In the private, you are comparing reputed private schools with the average government school. You can't do that. If you look at the average pay that is given to primary school teacher in private school, it is much less than government school. So everyone wants to become a government teacher. So that's one. But I would like to touch upon the issue raised by the gentleman. I think that's the issue. The teachers are the pivot of Indian education. The problem is that the mafias have seeped so deep into the teacher education system that we found it difficult to grapple with them. We tried to do that. You look at 16,000 B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges that we have in the country, 25% of them don't exist at all. If you give them good money, they'll give you a degree. If you give them better money, you can even get a naukri. That's the tragedy. Fortunately, we took them on, and fortunately, the government has taken a decision to move over to the 4-year B.Ed course. This would, in fact, eliminate all these so-called furgy, frivolous B.Ed and D.El.Ed colleges that run in a name and provide degrees to the teachers who ultimately become government teachers. Imagine a teacher who hasn't had a training. I will give you another statistics. Out of the 80 lakh teachers in the country, 14 lakh teachers were not trained to teach. And the legislation indicated that they should be thrown out of the service. Now that was not practically possible, so the law was amended, and now almost all these teachers are undergoing training under a special scheme. I hope they do get trained. Now imagine a scenario where you have 14 lakh teachers which are untrained, they're teaching children. So teachers is the critical issue. I think we should get down to it. We've started it, and I hope we take it through to its logical conclusion.
Just give me a minute, because I want to go back to Atishi Marlena on this very point. And Atishi, of course, I want you to add on to the point about teachers training and, you know, teachers getting updated on curriculum. And I know Delhi government did a lot of that. So I want you to share the experience there. And the other point that I think I want to ask is that, you know, I consider teachers in the highest stead. I think they need more dignity. They perhaps need more remuneration. They need to be respected by the society. And, you know, Mr. Swarup and I can agree to disagree on the remuneration part of this. But I still have a question. You know, if you look at the high number of vacancy in primary education, it is appalling. I mean, almost 9 lakh vacant positions across India. What explains this? What sort of apathy is this? Why have we allowed this to happen? I mean, we cannot counter, you know, every child. We can't. We've got to have more teachers to educate our children, don't we?
First of all, I would, on the question of teachers' remuneration, I will also agree with Mr. Anil Sarup, that your facts are actually wrong. A government senior secondary school principal gets paid a salary of 1 lakh rupees a month. A senior teacher who teaches grade 11 and 12 gets a salary of 80,000 rupees a month. Someone teaching grade 6 to 10 gets paid a salary of 60,000 rupees a month in the government school system. So government school teachers are not poorly paid. The problem is that, like a lot of other government institutions, government schools have very little accountability. So while teachers are getting paid well, they are not actually going and teaching in the classroom. So we need to improve systems of accountability in schools. We find that in Delhi government schools, since there's been a lot of effort in terms of training of teachers, in terms of some respect and dignity to teachers, improving their working conditions, we have found that the same teachers on the same salary are actually now teaching far better and students are getting far better results, number one. Number two, as far as vacancies go, I think that is the most crucial question. If there is no teacher in the classroom, then how is a child ever going to learn? And I think that all governments really need to address this issue on a war footing.
Okay, that's an important part. Governments need to address this on a war footing, and I think every state needs to take some part of the lead here as well. But let me take this across to Meeta Sengupta. And Meeta, thanks for being patient and staying with us. There is one side of the story as far as government teachers are concerned, government school teachers. And there is quite a very different side of the story when you talk about teachers in private schools. I mean, I've got children who go to private schools, and the plight, I think both Urvashi Sahni and Colonel Gopal Karan will agree that the plight is very different. The teacher is expected to do a lot more than just the core job of teaching. Parents are extremely busy. They have very high expectations of teachers. And in some sense, the task to bring up a child, at least in, private sector schools, is being handed out to the teacher. And if they fall short, there is this aggressive, abrasive relationships that parents have with teachers, almost that borderlines of suspicion. I mean, is that the other side of the story as far as teachers are concerned? Government versus private schools?
Well, again, in the private schools too, you have various different segments of private schools. So you have budget private schools, you have the middle level private schools, and you have the higher end or the progressive private schools. And the story is slightly different in each of these sets of schools. But the fact does remain, and I just want to quickly refer to this, the conversation previously about learning outcomes and quality and connected to this. That the fact remains that we need a huge shift in the way teachers tend to teach, both in the private schools that are enabling the second generation, fifth generation, 10th generation learners, and the private schools that are enabling first generation learners. So for example, learning outcomes, we seem to place them at the end of the year or the end of the cycle, but learning outcomes happen to be the middle of the cycle, where the feedback from the learning outcomes is actually used to improve teacher effort and to improve learner engagement in the classroom. We need to be able to enable that shift. The schools that you talked about and the parent pressure that you talked about, the entire atmosphere becomes some sort of a power play between, dare I use the term, stakeholders. In the classroom, does the teacher engage from a position of power, and can she impose or he impose discipline in the classroom? Is there some sort of a power struggle that's happening between teachers and parents? Is there an administrative conversation happening over here? Or are we talking about engaging in learning for the sake of creating joy, conversation, questions, growth, innovation? For that sort of a fluid situation to happen, we certainly agree with you, we completely need to be able to move away from this fear and command and control approach to schools, whether it is in the schools that are considered private and elite, and many of them have actually moved on. There's a whole new approach that's being engaged in many, many different schools. In terms of ICT, we are moving from ICT to computational thinking, which is about asking questions. Schools are engaging in a whole bunch of activities that are about engaging students. So the shift has begun, and hopefully the shift has begun from the progressive schools. But we cannot wait and hope for a trickle-down effect. The trickle-down effect hasn't worked. We need to bring a structural shift.
All right, just give me a minute now. Okay. We need to bring in a structural shift. Anil Swarup, I'll come to you, sir. And while the government is doing all that it takes to bring every child to the school, which is a heartening development, we are happy to see that happen. But what sort of a role do you envisage for the private sector? There are some private companies, private corporates who are very bullish on education. They run institutions. A lot of the really top cats of Indian industry have come together, formed universities, whether it's Ashoka, whether it's Shivnadar, Jindal, and things like that. What sort of a role can private sector play as far as primary education is concerned?
In my view, this whole narrative has to change. We have spoken about public versus private. I think the problem that we have about education in this country has to be sorted out with public and private sector working in tandem. And I would believe that the government, I was a part of the government a couple of months ago, we did make some effort. I think we have to create such conditions wherein private sector can also flourish. It's not that the child is going to the private school or public school. If the child can pay from his pocket, we should allow such schools to come in. I think a major shift in the thinking of the government has to come through in terms of creating enabling environment for private sector to flourish even in the context of education. Yes, if there is exploitation somewhere, that can be handled differently. But just because some schools may be exploiting it, I don't think we should discourage private schools from coming in. We should encourage private schools to come in as much as they can and also contribute to the evolution of quality education in this country.
Hold that thought, because I want to go to a private education or educationist on this note. And Colonel Gopal Karunakaran, I know Shivnadar runs a university, you run a very good school, but you also run Vidya Gyan. Is that a model that private industry will have to perhaps do going forward? And if I may ask you a little bit of a, uncomfortable question, education is not for profit, but for private sector, profit matters. How are you going to marry? How will the private sector go ahead and marry the two going forward?
Well, firstly, let me just add that for the Shivnadar Foundation, the reason to be in education is clearly not profit, right? It's one man's commitment to philanthropy for this country. Having said that, when you look at scale and the scale that India needs, I think one has to understand you cannot address the issue of scale without the issue of the private sector entering with some reasonable profit which is going into it. Setting up a school in Delhi, NCR, let's say it takes you about 200 crores to set it up. Now, who would set that up if there isn't some sort of return on investment over a period of time? And when you go to across the country and look at the problem of scale and quality, I don't think we can continue with hoping that billionaires' philanthropic mindset is really going to solve the problem. There has to be a change in shift, a change in regulations, and unless we are able to, like Mr. Swarup quite rightly said, marry the two, bring best practices in place, you cannot solve the problem of scale if you say the private investment in education will not be determined by reasonable profit.
Okay, let me go across to Atishi Marlena, and I've got very less time left on this show. And Atishi, every time we talk about education, the debate comes up on technology. And I know, when the kind of contribution that you made to education, you did try and marry technology with education. Help us understand what is the best use of technology that can be made. How do we bridge education gaps in the country, and especially for the marginalized students? Do we have the line? Okay, we don't have the line with Atishi Marlena, but I will go across to Urvashi Sahani on this. And Dr. Sahani, can Dr. Urvashi Sahani hear me? Okay, she can hear me.
I can.
Dr. Urvashi Sahani, you've been a big proponent of marrying technology with... Yes, you've been a big proponent of marrying technology with education. What sort of marriage is this going to be, and how will we best leverage technology going forward?
Yeah. I think technology can be used very wisely to take good teaching practices to scale. The way we've used it is to try and use it for teacher training, remotely, and I think Rajasthan is doing some of that, and also sharing good teaching practices by way of very simple, easily accessible, easily affordable, cost-effective technologies, and we've used video technology very successfully. I think the government has also put up the National Teacher Platform, and what it has done is it has invited many teachers, private players, government players to post on it all their successful teaching practices, which are being accessed very widely now by teachers across the country, given the problem of teacher training. This is a good way of taking good teacher training to scale in a remote manner, in an inexpensive manner. Our own teaching material that is gone online is accessed by lakhs and lakhs of teachers, and we get feedback from teachers telling us how it has helped them. One of our simple division lessons, class 4 lesson, has been viewed by 8 lakh teachers all over the country. So I think an intelligent use of technology will help us solve the problems at scale in an inexpensive manner, but provided we put teaching, pedagogy and teachers and students at the forefront and not just school technologies, and that we don't focus on making technology so complicated and so un-user friendly that nobody can access it.
Atishi, Marlena, I have a quick closing question for you, and then I'm going to have a quick last word with Anil Swarup as well. I want you to tell us, how did Delhi experiment with EWS fared out? The 1/4 seats reserved for economically weaker sections, that and technology, because I'm personally privy to the kind of technology that was used in schools, the kind of marriage between technology and education that happened.
So I think there's several things. I do agree with the fact that technology, rather than being used in schools, actually needs to be used to connect to teachers. And that is where the greatest and best use of technology actually lies, in getting access to teacher training methods. Because see, every teacher has a different learning need. And for every different learning need, one cannot design a teacher training workshop. So I think technology really lies at the center stage there. But I do think that when we are looking and talking about teacher training, rather than technology, what we need to draw upon are the creative and innovative experiences of the teachers themselves. I don't think that the solution eventually lies just in improving B.Ed colleges or improving teacher training programs. I think a lot of the solution lies in learning from teachers' own experiences, because I think teachers learn the most in their own classrooms. So, for example, in Delhi government schools, we created a cadre of mentor teachers. 200 teachers from within the schooling system who took on the job of mentors for about 20,000 teachers. Each teacher was allocated 5 schools. They sat in their classrooms. They gave them feedback. They taught them how to discuss how they can improve the lessons. So I think that there is a lot of creativity and innovation within our existing government school teachers, and that is what we really need to tap into.
Okay. A quick final word, and I think I want to end it on a more positive note. Education, that they say, is not just the building block of an economy or a society, it changes everything around you. Anil Swarup, you've been India's India's education secretary, and I think it's only fair that I ask you, what is the best example of a life-changing event that you have seen thanks to education?
You know what I saw when I walked into a school which does not have electricity. It is a place called Pastepada, 120 kilometers north of Thane district. The school did not have electricity but was totally digital. Every child had a tablet, there was a local Wi-Fi, there was a smart screen, and they were using foldable solar panels. Not they, the teacher there, Sandeep Gund, was using foldable solar panel to charge the batteries. To me, that was revolution. And the good news is that model that was so successful in Pastepada has been replicated in 60,000 schools of Maharashtra. The entire money of 354 crores coming from the private sector, a classic example of public-private partnership, and it's revolutionary. Similar things are happening in other parts of the country. What we really need to do is to understand the why of these success stories, replicate them and scale them. To me, technology is a game changer, will continue to be a game changer, and upgradation of skills of teachers there itself technology can be of great use. I'm so glad that National Teachers Platform, that is Diksha, that was mentioned, all the good practices, all the experiences of the teachers are being shared on that platform with all the teachers of the country. That's quite revolutionary.
Okay, on that note, thanks each one of you for being with us on this very, very special edition. I think the biggest ode to our teachers will be to overhaul India's education system, make it relevant. Quality education is what India needs. Thanks very much, each one of you, for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate.